I'm Pat McCormick, President-elect of the City Club of Portland, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who join us today at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, or watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today we welcome author and activist Sister Helen Prejean. But before our program begins, we have a few announcements. First, out of respect for our guests and the speaker, please silence all your cell phones. Next, I'd like to give a warm City Club welcome to our newest members, Dr. Jane Payne, a psychiatrist on the east side of town, and Marcia Janner from Sterling Savings Bank. Would you please stand so we can welcome you? City Club's corporate and media partners are essential to the vitality and sustainability of club activities. I'd like to thank our generous media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and extend our deep appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors. Please join me in offering our sincerest thanks to our fall quarter sponsors, AARP Oregon, Barron Liebman, and PGE. We are grateful for your support and your commitment to the City Club mission. If your company or firm would like to support City Club's mission through sponsorship, please contact the friendly City Club staff at the back of the room or call the City Club office. Did you know that each week an estimated 15,000 people listen to Friday forums on the radio? Perhaps you're even one of them. Your gift of $250 funds one Friday Forum video and audio recording, making the forum available online, on the radio, and on local television for thousands of Oregonians every week. Please donate generously to the City Club's annual fund using envelopes that are on your tables or at the back of the room. Your gift keeps Oregonians informed. Following today's speech, we'll be welcoming City Club members to the microphones for question and answers with our speaker. In addition, we invite all of our audience members to write questions for the speaker on the index cards at your table. During the board host question, City Club staff will collect these cards and pick the best one, which I will read from the microphone. We are sure you will come up with some great questions for today's speaker. And now to our program. This month, a judge declared Oregon's death row inmate Gary Haugen legally sane to be put to death, clearing the way for the state's first execution in 14 years. Paradoxically, it was Haugen himself who fought for this judgment, asserting that he is ready to die. Then earlier this week, death penalty opponents filed a request to stay the execution, arguing that a key piece of evidence, one demonstrating that Haugen is delusional, had been excluded from the judge's consideration. Today's speaker, Sister Helen Prejean, will discuss the moral complexities of Gary Haugen's case. She'll also relate how the death penalty is intertwined with the social justice fabric of this country and how public opinion on the death penalty is changing. Sister Helen Prejean joined the Sisters of St. Joseph's of Madai in 1957 at the age of 18. She began her prison ministry in 1981 when she became pen pals with Patrick Saunier, the convicted killer of two teenagers, who was sentenced to die in the electric chair of Louisiana's Angola State Prison. Upon Saunier's request, Sister Helen repeatedly visited him as his spiritual advisor prior to his execution. She turned her experiences into the book Dead Man Walking, an eyewitness account of the death penalty in the United States. This book was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for 31 weeks, was nominated for a 1993 Pulitzer Prize, and in 1996 became an Oscar award-winning movie. In 2004, Sister Helen wrote Death of Innocence, which tells the story of two men whom she believes were wrongly convicted and executed. As the founder of Survive, a victims advocacy group, Sister Helen continues to counsel not only inmates on death row, but the families of murder victims as well. City Club would like to express its gratitude to the University of Oregon Savage Chair in International Relations and Peace and the university's Appropriate Dispute Resolution Center for bringing Sister Helen here to Oregon. And now, please help me welcome today's speaker, Sister Helen Prejean.
Hi, we want to make every minute count. There's a life road and there's a death road. I'm in a state, Louisiana, one of the 10 southern states, who are the real practitioners of the death penalty. We are responsible for 80% of all the executions. The states that do the most executions are the states that practice slavery, the states that had lynching, the states that have the harshest penal institutions in the country. Oregon is a life state. Everything about Oregon is a life state. I mean, Oregonians, I've been meeting them, I can't help but make some contrast. I mean, you love the environment, you love the earth. I've been meeting with young people in Eugene all week in universities. They're taking international peace studies. They want to make a difference in the world. You even have like sprouts and granola for breakfast. You're healthy people. You're good people. And I want to take you with me on this journey because don't believe me, becoming a nun, my goal or ideal was not to go to death row. Who wants to go to death row? How do you end up on death row? What kind of current takes you there? I'm presently writing my spiritual memoir. It's called River of Fire, The Spiritual Journey. It's like a prequel to Dead Man Walking, and it tells that journey. I want to get you into the heart of it today, but where I want to begin with you is coming out of the death chamber when Patrick Saunier was executed in the electric chair, the first man I was ever with, who I wrote letters to, and 2 years later, here he is strapped down to be electrocuted to death, and I'm with him. And he looks at my face. And I come out of that death chamber, and it was on the early morning hours of April 5th, 1984. It's the middle of the night, it's dark. I'd never watched anybody be killed in front of my eyes before. I'd been with people who had died in the hospital, but dying is a natural process, and people fade from us. They lose consciousness, they stop eating. But this, I was with a man who was fully alive, and then the guards came for him and walked him like the length of this stage and killed him. I threw up, and I remember thinking, and it was clear as a bell, and it's why I'm standing before you today and why I travel the country talking to people about the death penalty, to bring people close to it. I remember thinking, the people are never going to get close to this. It's a secret ritual. You're never going to be there. And all you're going to hear around it is the media rhetoric with terrible crime, justice was done, end of story. And I said, I'm a witness. I've been brought into it, and I got to tell the story. And I want to talk a little bit here about the different art forms and ways of getting into discourse with society that we can move to a deeper level of reflection on the death penalty. I'm going to start there first. Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American Supreme Court justice, said the American people support the death penalty, but bring them close to it, educate the American people about the death penalty, and they will reject the death penalty. Well, all I knew coming out of that execution chamber was I had to start telling the story, so I did the most logical thing you would do. Anybody who would hear me give a talk on the death penalty, I would go, no matter how small the group or where the group was. One of those smaller audiences I well remember because it was in the St. Christopher nursing home in New Orleans, and they made an announcement after lunch Whoever wants to hear the death penalty, none, go to Parlor A. And these 3 people came to Parlor A, and I started telling the story and all, and after 10 minutes, 2 of them were gone. But one lady was listening, and I had my eyes locked like, lady, you're it for today. And then I gave talks, and then I wrote a book, Dead Man Walking. And then Susan Sarandon read the book, Dead Man Walking. And a book is like a child. A book has legs, a book goes where it wants to go. This particular book wanted to go into the lap of Susan Sarandon. I've had men friends that have, well, I'm not going to say they envy the book. But Susan was the one who saw that we needed a deeper, another kind of film about the death penalty in this country, because most of the formula films, if somebody did a crime, the whole movie was, did he do it or not? Is the person innocent? Oh, he's guilty, then he's executed, justice done, end of film. She said, we got to bring people much deeper than that. It took her 9 months, but she convinced Tim Robbins to finally read the book of Dead Man Walking, where I bring you over to both sides, both to the victim's family and their suffering and the one being executed, and his mother, his family, the suffering on both sides, bring you there. And Tim wrote the screenplay for Dead Man Walking, and every Hollywood studio turned it down, saying, Tim, it's a downer. And they couldn't picture it could be a box office success. And they said, besides, you got no romantic element in the film. You got a nun who's with the death row inmate. Now, if you let us, like, spice it up, we'll have us a film. And Tim Robbins is saying to them, it's not about spicing it up between the nun and the death row inmate. It's about the journey of redemption. And so the film of Dead Man Walking came to us in 1996. Susan got the Academy Award. And there were 1.3 billion people watching that night, the Academy Awards. And so it gave the book, and it gave the journey over to the people, because the book has the journey in it too. The death penalty is a tough issue because we're not talking about innocent people. We're talking about people who do unspeakable crimes to innocent victims. And there's a part in every one of us that it wells up inside of us when we hear and we have such outrage over the killing of innocent people. And outrage is ethical. We should feel outrage about the killing of innocent people. And then we go, well, they deserve to die. I didn't know anything about the death penalty when I got involved. First, I wrote a man on death row, then I visited the man on death row, then the man on death row was killed. I made a very bad mistake, didn't reach out to the victim's family. He and his brother had killed 2 teenage kids, didn't do anything, didn't write him a note, didn't say, I'm sorry about your son, I'm sorry about your daughter. And then when I met them, it was the worst possible time you could meet a victim's family, because it was a pardon board hearing 1 week before Patrick Saunier was killed for the murders. His brother got a life sentence. And the victim's family couldn't be more polarized at that point, because they're being told by the prosecutors, this is the last legal hoop you got to jump through before we get justice for your dead child. So you have all your relatives and all your friends, and you be there and you stare down those governor's appointees so that you can get your justice. And that's when I met him. And why was I there? I was there to ask a pardon board not to kill this man, let him be in prison the rest of his life. And when I met them, the girls' parents were furious at me. They refused to talk to me. They averted their gaze. They walked past me. And the set of parents, the LeBlancs who had lost their son, the father came right up to me. He said, Sister Helen, all this time you've been visiting with those 2 brothers, and you didn't want to come see us. You can't believe the pressure we under with the death penalty. I can't imagine that he'd be on it. What does he mean, pressure? Doesn't every victim's family given a chance? Don't you want the death penalty? And as I got to know Lloyd LeBlanc, he said, Sister, everybody was saying to me, Lloyd, you gotta be for the death penalty or look like you didn't love David, your son. And he said, I said, yeah, they're right. They're right. And I went there. I said, yeah, I want to see him die. I wish I could pull the switch. I don't care if his mother has to suffer. But he said, I didn't like the way that made me feel. Because my whole life, I love to help people. I'm kind. And that hatred and that bitterness was getting inside me. And then I said, They killed that boy, but I'm not going to let them kill me. And he set his face to go down the road of forgiveness. He was the first victim's family I ever met who taught me that what forgiveness means first and foremost is what you do for yourself. It's a way to save your own life, the integrity of your own soul, not to be overtaken by the hatred and bitterness. And that was Lloyd LeBlanc, and he was my first teacher. And seeing over these 20-something years where the death penalty has gone in this country, it is victims' families standing up who are the ones helping us to put the death penalty down, to close down the machinery of death. When New Jersey did away with the death penalty 4 years ago, 62 murder victims' families appeared before that legislative body and said, don't kill for us. And they told their stories. And one mother said, we lost our child, but I know there's another mother here. And I know if the state kills the one who killed our child, another mother is going to have to bury her child. Some said, do you really think that we're going to wait 10, 15 years or whatever it is, and then we get to watch as you kill the one who killed our loved one, and by watching that killing, that is going to heal us and give us closure? One man in Oklahoma City, after the bombing, when we had a gathering of Catholic charities to bring the victims' families together, stood up and said, could we not use that word closure anymore? He said, you close on a house. You close the chapter of a book. But my daughter was killed in that bombing. And there's not a night in my life when I put my head on the pillow as her father that I don't think about her. But with God's grace, we're moving on. We have a family. We choose in life for our family. And one of the messages that's been inherent in the death penalty is that we need to do it for the victim's family. We don't dare not do it for the victim's family. It'll look like we're not sensitive to their pain. And people were saying, I'm waiting all these years for my justice to come. The wound is open in public. The media can come to me every time there's a change in the status of the case because it's all public knowledge. How are we supposed to heal? And then the more you get into this thing, I was right in the death house. I've accompanied 6 people to execution, 4 in Louisiana, 1 in Virginia, 1 in Texas. Do we ever think about the guards? Do we ever think about the wardens? I was doing an interview yesterday, Frank Thompson, who was the warden in 96 and 97 when 2 people were killed here in Oregon. He'll come talk to you. He'll come say what happened to him as the one who had to carry that out for the citizens of Oregon. I've had guards in the death house in Louisiana as we're waiting through the final moments, and one of the prisoner who was about to be killed is with his family. I've had guards come up to me and say, Sister, I really don't want to be part of this. You know what I mean, but it's part of the job. I got a wife and kids. I've had guards come up to me and say, Sister, the man we killing tonight is a very different human being from that young, brash animal that came in this prison 15 years ago, cursing everybody. Because he's been reading and he's been reflecting and he's changed. But with the death penalty, there is no redemption. We freeze frame a person in the worst act of their life, and then we freeze frame ourselves in having to kill them. It's got nothing of life in it. We even have people executed in this country who wanted to give their organs over, their cornea for transplant. not acceptable. No life comes out of this death. And we're at a crossroads in our country now where we got to be making some decisions. Martin Luther King used to say the most moral document you ever look at is a budget. And are the resources of our state going for life, or are they going for death? And you're similar to New Jersey and New York. You're similar to the states that have the death machinery in the garage. And the only time it's used is when people on death row says, hey, I'll do it. The consensual executions have been most of your executions. What is it? It's $1 million a month to keep this death machinery going. And that means paying for everything. They're all poor people, so you're going to pay for defense, you're going to pay for the trial, you're going to pay for prosecution, you're going to pay for the appeals of this elaborate legal machinery we have set up. When I leave here, I'm going to California, and we're going to plan a campaign. Tim Robbins has written the play of Dead Man Walking because he wants to give the discourse over to the young people of this country to do. It's a drama. It's a stage play. It's called the Dead Man Walking School Theater Project. You do the play in the school, high schools, universities. 2 departments have to pick up the issue of the death penalty to study it. And the play is like the catalyst of the discourse to get people thinking. Meanwhile, you're learning about the death penalty. You're learning about how it isn't a deterrence, and roughly the states that do the death penalty the most have doubled the homicide rate of states that don't. You learn about race in the death penalty. Overwhelmingly, in the 1,200 people who've been killed in this country, 80% of them because they kill white people. You learn that when people of color are killed, it's hardly a blip on the radar screen. Because there's no outrage over certain deaths in this country, because the citizens are not as highly valued. No outrage over death, so who's going to seek the ultimate penalty when you don't care about the life? We learn about race. We learn about poverty. We learn about how the thing comes down. And we learn about the Supreme Court that has equal justice under law carved on their front porch. And then you learn in the practical application of who actually gets it. Of the slave states doing it, we've always been the practitioners of the death penalty in the Deep South. Because whites were threatened when slaves were freed. We have the highest misery statistics in the country of adult illiteracy in the whole bit. And we are the ones who do the most incarcerating. But you're doing your fair share too. I'm going to California. They have 700 people on death row. In the last 28 years, California built 27 prisons and 1 university. Education's being cut here in Oregon. Schools are being closed here in Oregon. In Lane County, where I just was, 1 in every 5 people are hungry, who don't have food. There's already been more emergency aid given out in this state than you have ever done before, and you're not even in the winter yet. Where are we going to put the resources? These are all life issues for people. It's for kids. It's for food. It's for schools. It's for education, the things that really matter for life, to help families, the unemployed. And all we got to do is open our eyes and look and see what's happening across the country. What's all this Occupy? What's this 99% number 1%? What is it as you begin to look into the economics of this whole country that over the last 25 years, profits have gone up? But the wages of people have stayed stagnant or decreased. And now we number 49 million people in poverty. The disparity economically in the United States of America is greater than Tunisia and Egypt. We got to look at this. We have to understand it. And we have to start making some choices for life. It was incredible to me, the awakening that happened, and I want to talk about the awakening also of my own Catholic church in this. When I came out, in fact, the way I'm going to begin this book, River of Fire, is the way it goes, the prelude goes, I watched a man be killed with fire one night. They strapped him in an oaken chair and pumped electricity through his body. I was there that night. I was a witness. I saw what happened. I came out of the execution chamber. There were no religious leaders there to protest this execution. There was even a statistic in the mid-'80s that the more people who went to church, believed in the death penalty. There was no religious opposition. As in the days with abolition of slavery, the churches, the faith community was very involved in working for abolition. But I had been a witness, and the fire began in my heart, and it's a fire that continues today. So with the Catholic Church, when I began the discourse, when I began saying, and I began learning, of course, when you write a book, you want to make sure everything in that book is real. Because you can do a TV interview and maybe you're a little off on your facts and somebody could come and say, hey, you missed this point. But when it's in print, you got to be sure. I learned a lot about the death penalty in writing Dead Man Walking, about how it works. In my own church, most Christians in the United States in the early 80s, there were statements by religious leaders, but they were statements on paper, including the Catholic bishops. But it had so many loopholes in it, our prosecutors in Louisiana quoting the bishops. Because it really wasn't tough. My first teachers were Amnesty International. I began to learn about human rights. I began to learn about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948 that Eleanor Roosevelt had such a big hand in. Article 3, everybody has the right to life. Article 5, no one should be subjected to torture or cruel and degrading punishment. I have no doubt in the experiences I have had in the death house that people go through mental torture. It's partly why people give up their appeals. Can you imagine the stress on a human being who maybe has had some struggles mentally anyway, or not the best upbringing, or really solid in themselves, to sit in a cell every day and wait to be killed? And I learned that human rights are inalienable. They're not given by governments for good behavior or taken away for bad behavior. They're inalienable. They can't be alienated from the person. And that's the road that we're going to go down, is human rights. Whatever a person's faith background or not, we can stand together in human rights, and it has to do with the dignity of the person. So when I first began getting out, we did marches, we did media interviews, we went and gave talks to start waking up the people. The last person to help me was the Archbishop in New Orleans, because he had been in the paratroopers in World War II, and he was all for the death penalty. I go, Archbishop Hannon. He said, sister, we have to protect ourselves. Some of these people have a terrorist mentality. This is in the 80s. I go, Archbishop, we don't have any terrorists on death row in Louisiana. We got all poor people. We got a disproportionate number of people of color. And I got to say this on his behalf. I sent him the manuscript of Dead Man Walking, and I'll put it in the book. Whenever somebody was really going to die, like Patrick Saunier and the second person I was with, I'd call the Archbishop and I'd say, Archbishop, would you call the governor? Archbishop, would you say something to the pardon board? Sure, he was right there. He didn't want to see real people die. He wanted to uphold the idea of the death penalty. And a lot of what the death penalty really is political symbolism. It's just symbolism about how tough we're going to be on crime. But nobody really knows how the thing works. So my journey begins with the Catholic Church, which mainly means, ever since Vatican II helped us have a new understanding of our church, means the people. The people are the church. So I've been with the people. I've been with bishops some, but mainly I've been with the people. Because if the people get it, And that's not just with hierarchy either. If the people get it, the hierarchy's going to get it of churches, and the legislators are going to get it of states. There's a direct connection between people writing to legislators, calling legislators, being involved in initiatives and standing up and change in society. This is no state secret, that when the people stand up for change and help move change. I guess I've learned as a citizen, I used to not be active. I thought I'm spiritual, so I'm apolitical. I'm above politics. I have media sometimes ask me, what are you and none doing getting involved in a political issue like the death penalty? And then I found out that the gospel of Jesus was always about standing on the side of the people who have no voice, or the people considered disposable human waste in a society. And I came to understand, to say I'm apolitical means I'm not doing anything, so I'm supporting the status quo. And in a democracy, there's no way to be apolitical. If our voices are silent on the death penalty, our names are very much on that gurney. And if Gary Haugen goes through with this and he's killed on December 6th, our names are on that gurney. So the discourse with the people, with the bishops, and then in my second book, The Death of Innocence, I was with a man in Virginia by the name of Joseph Odell. He claimed his innocence from the beginning. I didn't know how the courts work before I got involved with the death penalty. Now I know a lot about how the courts work. And I know if you walk out of that courtroom and you've been to trial and you come out with a death sentence and you are poor and you don't have money for good lawyers to come and immediately start taking your appeal, you are going to die. Maybe you heard about Troy Davis in Georgia, a black man accused of killing a white police officer. 9 eyewitnesses at his trial pointed at him and said, yeah, Troy did it. Maybe you heard how 7 of those 9 eyewitnesses, all of them black kids, all of them coerced by the police, all of them pressured, recanted, and said we lied because the police were pressuring us. But there was no way to get that into the courts because our courts, including the Supreme Court's, trump procedure over justice. And they shut the doors of the courts and said you should have gotten in this information sooner. Timeways or legalisms that you're supposed to have. And when you're poor and you're at trial and then you get in post-conviction appeals, you don't have the luxury of that. I was in England when Troy Davis was killed. They was all over the BBC. I was talking in high schools and kids knew about Troy Davis in Georgia. Once you come out, the treadles come up behind you, and it is very difficult to get new evidence at a very late stage. And they say you should have done it early, and you say, I didn't have defense to get it early. This evidence only came out later. And the doors are shut. So this man, Joseph Odell in Virginia, he keeps speaking out that he's innocent. A woman, Laurie Ayers, gets involved in an innocence project called Centurion Ministries. She begins to stand up for Joseph Odell. They begin getting it out on the media. The Italian parliament hears about it. They send a delegation over, their human rights delegation from Italy, to go visit with Joseph Odell. They hear about this case. Pope John Paul then hears about Joseph Odell. Laurie summons me in. And I'm in there, just try to get media attention. Look at this man. Look at, he's never had a full evidentiary hearing in any court about this evidence. There's a rape kit sitting in there now. If we could get a DNA test on it, it could show that he didn't rape Helen Shartner, which would take the felony out for the death penalty, which will save his life. And Virginia wouldn't let the rape kit be tested. And it goes to the courts, and the courts wouldn't let the rape kit be tested. And they killed Joseph Odell. And Virginia then destroys the rape kit so he can never be tested. But meanwhile, all of Italy is involved. I love the Italians. What is it? Is it the pasta? What is it with the Italians? They're wonderful on human rights. They helped save the life of Paula Cooper, the 16-year-old girl who had killed her Sunday school teacher. And I mean, the people of Italy, they had millions of letters, and they say Paula Cooper's life, and they are involved. The night Joseph Odell was killed in Virginia, 5 million people stayed listening to their radios in Italy. What happened to Joseph Odell? And so I get a chance to have a direct dialogue with Pope John Paul. And so I get a chance. But the dialogue is relentless. The way we change society, the way we change anything is dialogue of the people, relentless dialogue, getting in information, coming to understand how things work, seeing that we have an alternative to choose to use our resources. And I said, Your Holiness, does the Catholic Church only stand for the dignity of innocent human life? What about guilty human life? And when I'm walking with a man to execution, and he's shackled hand and foot, and he says to me, Sister, please pray that God holds up my legs. There is no dignity in this death. Help the Catholic Church take a strong stand to oppose the death penalty. A principled stand. Amnesty had a principled stand. The UN Declaration of Human Rights had a principled stand. Ours was kind of all over the place. Well, you can have these exceptions or these loopholes and the Pope did. Now you got to know the dialogue's going all over the church. The bishops in different countries are beginning to stand up too, but the people, it's always the people that drive everything that make change. And the Pope changed the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and he stood before everybody in St. Louis, and for the first time, put the death penalty in with the other pro-life issues. And he stood before the people, and it was familiar. No to abortion, no to euthanasia, no to physician-assisted suicide, no to the death penalty, which is cruel and unnecessary. Even those among us who have done terrible crimes have a dignity that must not be taken from them. Isn't that who we really are? Don't we want to be for that, to be for life? We have ways now. We have ways to protect ourselves from violent people. We really got to start looking at our prisons. We have 2.3 million people in prison. 2/3 of them are there for nonviolent crimes. Women are separated from their families for 10 years because they forged a check. Have you heard of Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow? Some people have. This is the Portland Civic Club. I know y'all read books in this place. But she wrote this book. We have massive incarceration of black people in this country. And you know how they did it? Over making drugs a felony. And you look overwhelmingly, many more white people than black people use drugs. But when it comes to incarcerating people for drugs, 70% of those incarcerated are black or people of color. We have a greater percentage of incarceration of people of color in this country now than they had in South Africa during the days of apartheid. 1 in every 3 young black men ages 20 to 29 are in the prison system in the United States. Either they're waiting to go to trial or they're on parole or afterwards. That is unspeakable. So the death penalty is kind of the apex of a whole mountain that we have to look at. How do we get to be so punitive? What makes us think if we just simply throw people into warehouses, even as we cut social programs? The police chiefs have figured this out. They have 2 polls, opinion polls of police chiefs where they were interviewed and given a list of 10 remedies to stop violent crime. And they all put the death penalty dead last. And these are savvy people, these police chiefs. They know about crime on the streets. The way they put it was the people doing the thinking and the people doing the murdering are 2 separate sets of people. Most people that commit crimes don't even think they're going to be caught. They're not thinking of consequences. Ooh, let me weigh this now. Well, I'll kill this person, get death, or life without parole. Pros and cons. Wait, people are not thinking. We know what causes a fire in a house. We know that if you have oily rags all knotted up in this place and there's a spark, you can have a fire. When are we going to figure out that if you have a dead-end life, you don't have a job, the education you get? In New Orleans, that was such a big shock to me because I'd gone to Catholic schools and my education was excellent. And when I moved into the St. Thomas housing projects and lived with people and saw the kids coming in who had dropped out of high school, here they come in, they're juniors in high school and they couldn't read a third grade book. What's going to happen to those kids? If you're not educated, you don't even know who you are or to be able to have agency. And in Oregon, to be cutting the education budget and to be closing schools, and you keep forking out $1 million a month to keep a death machine in place that's mostly just sitting in the garage, and unless you got volunteers saying, I want to go into the garage, you're not a serious practitioner of the death penalty. Louisiana's a serious practitioner. Texas is a serious practitioner. But all the states that use the death penalty have the biggest social problems and the highest social misery statistics. We got to find a better way. And don't think the death penalty is like a peripheral moral issue about what to do about these few terrible criminals, because all of our wounds are in it. It hits at the very soul of America. Our deepest wounds that only poor people are chosen. There are 15,000 homicides in this country every year. Supposedly, the Supreme Court said we're supposed to give the death penalty only, get this now, for the worst of the worst. Anybody know what that means? Well, you killed my mother, but there wasn't a felony. She was just killed, so that doesn't count. You killed my husband, but he was a firefighter. He wasn't a policeman. That doesn't count. You killed our child, but he happened to be 14, so he doesn't qualify as a child. You have to be 12 or younger, so no death penalty for my son. We don't know what worst of the worst means. And think of the juries. Think of the jurors that have to go, and here they have to make a decision about whether they're going to let the person live and they're going to have life without parole. We can be safe and we can be protected, or if they are going to make the decision that a human being's got to die. And it's got to be unanimous. That means if any juror doesn't vote for death, it means the person lives, so every juror holds that life in their hands. You think it really matters because we say, well, it's all legal. Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk, said, when the world ends, it'll be legal. We saw what happened with Abu Ghraib. We saw what happened as the torture memos came out about Guantanamo. What is the first thing you do with the Geneva Conventions for prisoners of war? You make it legal. So you go to the lawyers. And it's chilling to read those documents that was going on between Bush and Alberto Gonzales and the people making torture legal. And the first thing you do is just change the terms. Well, they're not prisoners of war in Guantanamo. They're enemy combatants. Justice Antonin Scalia, one of the 5 Catholics on the Supreme Court, gave an interview with the BBC. That's one of the most chilling things I've ever heard in my life. Because, of course, the Brits, the Brits, they go, well, Justice Scalia, don't you have in your Constitution against cruel and unusual punishment, but look what's been done to those prisoners in Guantanamo. It's punishment. Isn't that cruel and unusual punishment? Scalia said, hold on, wait a minute. We're not talking about punishment. Punishment is what happens after you've had a trial and been convicted. This is just to get information. And he said you can do whatever you need to do to get information that might save a whole city. So you could drive bamboo shoots under people's fingernails, do whatever you have to do. No holds barred. That's the Supreme Court of the United States. Legal. make it legal. And see, I've seen this thing close up. And when these 6 human beings that I've been with have been killed, it was all legal. And often the polls showed that people support it. But back to Thurgood Marshall. He said the people say they support it, but they haven't thought about it deeply. Help the people reflect on the death penalty. Educate the people about the death penalty. And the people will reject it. No better place than Oregon. No better place to shut this down than in Oregon. So I want to invite you to get involved in the discourse, learn about it, begin to voice. You know, you have a governor of this state, ironically, he was the one that was in office before we had the executions, and now he's in office again. Is there a way to talk to him? Is there a way to look at the budget, to look at the whole thing about being a society and a state that moves toward life and not using all of our resources for so much about punishment and death? Isn't there a road forward on this? And can't we call it life? Can't we call it dignity? And the good citizens of Oregon who are going to be the ones to change it. Thank you.
Before I introduce our Friday Forum host, if you have written a question on an index card, now's the time to hold it up so that City Club staff can collect it from you. Thank you. The first question for our speaker, as always, will be from our Friday Forum host, Sharon Brabenak. Sharon is the Director of Development for the YWCA in Greater Portland. A City Club member since 1983, Sharon has chaired the membership and the development committees and currently serves on the Board of Governors. Sharon?
Sister Helen, this is a blessing for me. I've heard you twice speak now, and I'm inspired by you. And I just wonder, in general, with a lot going on in the world this week, in particular with death, you know, where does America really fit in with the rest of the world population on how we view the death penalty?
Where do we fit into the world? Well, there's also, I want to just trace things to a mentality in the Supreme Court where statements were made of, we don't need to consult the wisdom of Europe or international community on this. And I think that's why we've been going down the road, because of this myopic view that we know how to interpret our own Constitution. We're the only Western industrialized country in the world that still executes its citizens. Japan is an industrialized country, but it's in Asia. 40 years ago, only a handful of countries didn't have the death penalty. Now the majority of nations in the United Nations do not have the death penalty. They've shut it down in Rwanda, the first act of South Africa, when they overturned apartheid of their constitutional court was to overturn the death penalty. Any countries, as they move toward being a democratic society, one of the first acts is to take away from government that power to kill individuals for crimes and decide what those crimes are. Like in Malaysia, when you arrive in the airport, there's a big sign, the death penalty for drugs. In Kenya, it could be the death penalty for adultery. We can't give government that kind of power. So we're one of the last countries in the world. And often when I'm in England, I was just in England in the earlier part of the month here, and people say, what is it about the American people that make the American people so vengeful that you hold on to the death penalty? And I said, it's not that the American people are invested in the death penalty or vengeful particularly. We never think about it. The death penalty is not one of the moral issues that touches our life personally, and so there's no reflection on it. The minute you help people to reflect and bring them there, they get it. It's not that hard. So it's a question of educating the people. More than anything, I think, that is what we have to do.
We'll now take questions from the floor. As always, members are invited to the microphone to ask a question. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a privilege of City Club membership. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your question in 30 seconds or less. If I flash this question mark card, it means please wrap up your question. Also, I will read at least one audience member question from the index cards. Sister Helen, what do you say to a death row inmate who volunteers to be executed?
I've been with a number of people in the past who wanted to end their life and asked the state to help them do it. And everybody's got a story. And I know now over 90% of people who are on death row were abused as children and the violence pumped into them, and then they do violence to other people. It's a place of great mental stress to be on death row. And while I want to say to every single person who's on death row, no, you got to live. You got to live. You don't want to be cooperating with the state that's going to take your life. Live. Well, often when I visit them, I'm not in their state, and I can't assure them a community of people who are going to be supportive of them in that. And I, of course, would want everybody to choose to live and not let the state kill them. But I understand, too, that people reach points in their life where they go, I'm tired and I can't do it anymore. I was with one guy, I remember in Ohio, and he had been terribly abused as a child, and even on death row, he had been beaten up. And that's where you're in a solitary cell, an individual cell. And he said, what's going to happen to me? If I get out from under the death penalty and they put me in population at large, I'm not going to have a chance. And so I took his hands and I prayed with him and I talked about the dignity of his life. And I was at a point where I said, I would love for you to choose to live. But then I had to leave it with him because it is his decision. It's a really tough thing. And people get very tired and mentally stressed. We have a lot of mental illness in prison. And we have a lot of mental illness on death row. But then you have some people who have done terrible things, and part of it is the burden of what they've done, and they get tired of living. And the state's all too willing. Just one little thing, in Oklahoma, there was a guy who tried to OD on drugs. He collected drugs, he OD'd to try to take his own life. They haul him out, bring him to a hospital, pump his stomach, get him back, and 2 weeks later the state kills him. They don't want you taking yourself out. They want to take it. And when you reach a point where the energy's gone, any desire to live is gone, and then the state is all too willing to assist you in that suicide, saying, come on, we're ready, we'll do it.
Member of City Club, can you please discuss where the current presidential candidates stand on the death penalty?
Well, that's a no-brainer. Presidential candidates, you're not going to find one who's going to say that they're against the death penalty. And Obama is a cut above in a lot of ways. But even he has said when he was running for president that and here we go, this is called the designer death penalty. This is the perfect theory about the death penalty. That if there's a terrible crime, particularly heinous, the evidence is in, no doubt the person's guilty, we have to allow the death penalty for those instances. Because the outrage of the community needs to be expressed. If I had 5 minutes with him, I'd say, President Obama, have you noticed when outrage is expressed over the death of victims in this society and when they're not, like, for example, people of color? But these president candidates, with the heat of the political race being what it is, the tone of it, the lack of civility in so many ways of the discourse that's going on in our nation now, I just can't imagine that anybody's going to get up there and say. And I'm principled and I'm against the death penalty. I just don't think it's going to happen right now. We have to change that. Politicians follow the people. We have to be the ones to change that with our candidates here in Oregon and nationally as well.
Carol Witherell, City Club member. What are the key barriers to moving our civil discourse forward so that we don't continue to be freeze-framed? And what are the key opportunities for breaking through those barriers to really move something forward?
Well, this is one of those examples where you have civil discourse from citizens who gather simply because you're interested in the issues of the day and you want to be a better citizen. We do have a phenomenon beginning to happen of the Occupy Wall Street that's going on here. We haven't seen anything like this before, of a cross-section of people, young people and librarians and retired citizens, and getting it about the economy and knowing that we have to make a change. And that spurs discourse. That blows on the coals and gets the fire going of discourse. So letters to the editor, blogging, tweeting, twittering, all those ways we have now to communicate with each other in public discourse about the issues of our day. We need to make ourselves, avail ourselves of all of those things. Talking together and then coming forward with the plan. Here's the way forward. The death penalty, if you undertake it in this state, it's going to be the occasion to raise up in consciousness a lot of these. For example, how much you're spending on the death machinery and what's happening to education, what's happening to cut mental health services, what's happening to cut all the programs for kids. If you take an issue that's like a catalyst or a gateway issue, the other issues then get involved as you begin to speak about it.
Hi, I'm Charity Fain, Executive Director of City Club, and I've got another question from the floor. How do you assist people to move from rage about crimes to a path of forgiveness?
How do you assist? That's a good one. I'm going to tell you a conversation I had with my editor, Jason Epstein, when I first began this, when I was writing the book of Dead Man Walking. And he said, now, Helen, you are up against some obstacles. You're a Roman Catholic nun. You're the spiritual advisor to murderers who did terrible crimes. And the first thing I'm going to tell you about this book is, if you don't talk about the crime in the first 10 pages of this book, nobody's going to read your book. Because you have to deal unblinkingly with the horror of a crime, and you have to let people know that you feel the outrage of it too, that innocent life was taken. And he divided up the population. He said, roughly, I think this is where the discourse is going to lie. There are some people, 1 in every 5, it checked out, who are already in principle against the death penalty. I'm going to guess there's a greater percentage of them in Oregon, just because y'all do this kind of thing more. And on the other end of the spectrum, I don't know how to describe them. Let's put it this way, that Jesus could be with him on a desert island and Gandhi and Martin Luther King for 6 months or 6 years, and they're going to come off saying, fry him. And these are the people impervious to dialogue for whatever reason. They've been hurt, somebody they know has been hurt, but they're impervious to real conversation or dialogue. But 60% of the American public are ambivalent about the death penalty. On the one hand, you hear about a terrible crime and you go, well, I'd like to have it for this one. But then on the other hand, you know it's hard to trust government even to get the potholes filled. I mean, how are we going to have a system? And now with more and more knowledge of 138 people who have come off a death row, saved by college students, it's dealing with the ambivalence. And William Faulkner, when he got the Nobel Prize for Literature, he said the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. We have to tap into that ambivalence, and we have to get real information. Once some people know that people who have done these terrible crimes that could get the death penalty really are going to be in prison the rest of their life and society can be saved, that's the end of it for them. A lot of them don't even have that information. A lot of them don't even know that capital punishment makes it far more expensive than people who get a life sentence. They don't know how that works. That seems counterintuitive to them. And when people are enraged and they say, well, it seems like the cost of a few chemicals will never be as great as 3 hots in a cot for the rest of their life, and taxpayers paying for those people in prison. And once you start looking at the expensiveness of the death penalty, you have to have 2 trials, and then the appeals begin. And normally, lawyers are not going to bring appeals for their clients all the way through the courts. But when your client's going to be killed if you stop the appeals, and people pay on both ends of this all the way. One prosecutor said the capital cases are the Cadillac of the criminal justice system. And people have to be educated about that too. They don't know that. You don't automatically know that.
We've run out of time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. Please join us next week when Rex Burkholder, Marcus Munday, and Wim Vival will offer regional analysis describing how we're doing in areas ranging from economic opportunity and education to healthcare and the arts. As we close, please join me in expressing our sincerest appreciation to today's guest, Sister Helen Prejean. We are adjourned.